Namaskar. Dear viewers, today we'll be discussing an important topic on climate change. What exactly the relationship between climate change and water resources? To start with, we know that climate change is going to challenge our existence. In fact, it is going to affect every aspect of human being. It also affects the resources, whether it's a natural resources or man-made resources. So in that context, today we'll be discussing about the climate change interaction with water resources. We know that the emergency with regard to the climate change, it is very pertinent. For simple reason is that in the last century, if you see it, the temperature, surface air temperature has increased to more than 0.9 degrees centigrade. And the scientific community is of the opinion that by the year 2030, the surface air temperature will be more than 1.5 degrees centigrade as compared to the pre-industrial levels. So having said this thing, the issue of climate change is far more important because a lot of people, if you see, there are a lot of disparities existing between the people among the countries also, and when you look at the vulnerability also. So there's a lot of inequalities is there. So one aspect is the gravity of the situation. The second important thing is the vulnerability of the people. Third important thing is that the natural resources, if you look at it, it is definitely very scarce in nature and definitely is having multiple uses. So in this context, the issue of water resources is a very, very important thing. And when you talk about the water resources, because definitely, the climate change is going to affect the society, the human interaction with the physical resources, or in other words, the physical system as such. So this water resources, when you talk about it, is, if you can understand very well that, the disasters, because when you talk about climate change, along with the climate change, there is a lot of variability is there. When you talk about variability, there's a drastic increase in the disasters, particularly the extreme events, whether it is a storm, flood, drought. So there are so many disasters that is the occurrence, the frequency, it has increased in the recent past. And the main reason is because of the climate variability. And the second important thing as far as the climate change and the water resources is concerned, as I said earlier, that there is a lot of disparities or inequalities that is there between the developed and developing countries, and these inequalities can accelerate the vulnerability. So when I say inequality, because when you talk about the impact of climate change, it's projected in fact in the subtropical region, and this subtropical region is known for the least developing countries or developing countries, and they are already vulnerable in terms of the economic resources or socioeconomic status. So because of that thing, what happened, their vulnerability will be increasing. And when you see that is the reason why by the year, in fact, in 2015, so the community, the group of nations, they came forward to address the issue of climate change through Paris Agreement. When you look at the Paris Agreement, the basic objective of Paris Agreement is to keep the increase in surface air temperature well below 2 degrees centigrade, and at the same time we'll be taking all the steps possible to reduce the increase in surface air temperature. However, I said earlier that even if you see it, almost when you look at the pre-industrial level, almost 1.1 degrees centigrade, the surface air temperature has increased. So the scope is very less, or in other words, we need to take the right steps very proactively. And when you look at the impacts of climate change, as I said, that because it is going to change the global resource map. And I say resource map because particularly the water resources, the impact will be more prominent or significant in nature. And when you said it's significant, because it's having a lot of uses. Water is life, and many people depend on this thing for every purpose, whether it's an economic development, economic growth, we are dependent on water resources. And whether how much we can use it. And when you look at it, because there are a lot of dimension is there too, as far as water resources is concerned, along with climate change, the increase in the population, the need for economic growth and development, and also if you see the very important thing is the water pollution also. So definitely when you go with the increase in the population, the negative externality is the pollution problem. So all the problems is giving a lot of stress to the water resources. And the most important stress is climate change. So in today's discussion, we'll be trying to talk about the interaction between climate change and water resources, and we'll be trying to talk about the climate change trends, and thereafter what kind of interaction that is there between climate and water, and we'll be talking about the climate change impacts on water resources, and lastly we'll be trying to talk about the solution. When I talk about the solution, definitely we'll need to look at certain green solutions, because we have used a lot of grey infrastructure or grey engineering. We have used it to use the water most effectively and efficiently, and that is the reason why we are in a position to use the water, whether it's a drinkable or potable water. We are trying to use it. I'm talking about the construction of dam and other infrastructure. So as far as the solution is concerned, we'll be trying to talk about the solutions more focused on the nature-based solutions. So now, when you talk about the trends, the climate change trends, the most prominent trend is the increase in surface air temperature. When you talk about this increase in surface air temperature, the trend is more prominent. When I say that there's no because as I said that almost in the last century we have the surface air temperatures increased to 0.9 degrees centigrade. So the trend is very clear. When you talk about the trend with respect to the amount of precipitation or rainfall, it's a lot of uncertainty is there. When uncertainty in terms of the temporal scale also, spatial scale also. When I say spatial scale, the trend is more uncertain, because in certain parts of the world you'll be finding more of precipitation, the occurrences, the frequency, and even the duration, intensity, everything will be much higher. On the other hand, if you see in certain other pockets of the world, the precipitation, the amount of rainfall will be much lesser. So that may lead to drought-like conditions. So there's a lot of uncertainty is there as far as precipitation pattern is concerned. So these are the two important trends that we need to look at for today's discussion. So when you talk about the precipitation, for instance, if you see there is less of rainfall, and that the deficit can definitely have a negative impact on the soil moisture, and that can lead to deficit, or other words, impact on the groundwater resource. So in a way, what I want to say is that a lot of linkages is there, and it's a very complex relationship that is existing between the climate, or in other words, the precipitation or any meteorological parameter, and water resources. The flow effect, when I talk about the groundwater resources, how it will be affected because of the deficit in the precipitation. This groundwater deficit, the effect you can tangibly see after a very long time, and the impact also will be very much be gradual. That's why we used to use the word memory effect, because the impact will be also gradual, but it will be irreversible in nature, because slowly and steadily, if you look at it, the groundwater resources will be depleting because of lesser rainfall or a kind of an arid condition. So this is the most prominent trend that we are observing in the recent past, and potentially it will be much higher in the coming days or coming years. And next one is that when you talk about the trend, the most important thing is that as I said earlier also, the amount of precipitation that is it's going to reduce in this subtropical region. When I say subtropical region, as I said that the mostly the countries, the communities are more vulnerable for want of they don't have the resources or social status. So these all the things makes the community more vulnerable. And this precipitation pattern in the subtropical region, it's very, very less. When I say precipitation pattern, because it's showing a negative trend or decreasing trend. So this is the most prominent observation that we are seeing as far as the climate change trend is concerned. And coming to the other aspect of the climate change, that is heat waves. Occurrence of heat waves, the frequency, the intensity, that is going to increase because of the occurrence of heat waves, these extreme events that may lead to certain drought-like condition also. So on one hand, it will be flood risk, on the other hand, it's a drought risk. So these both risks, if you look at it, it has been unevenly distributed across the globe. When I say unevenly distributed, I'm talking about the geographical scale. And for instance, if you look at it in the Western African countries or Upper Amazon, the precipitation, that is potentially what they are saying is that the precipitation is going to reduce. So definitely if you see in the West African region, where the river Niger river basin, it's a very prominent one. It's already is having a lot of problem because of climate change. The drought-like condition is there, the famine condition is there, and so in the coming years, the coming decades, because of climate change, the impact will be much higher in the West African region and also in Amazon region also. So this is as far as the climate change trend is concerned. Now, let us look at the interaction between climate change and water. And the relationship can be discussed in multiple dimensions. One important thing is the hydrological cycle and what kind of relationship that is existing between climate change and water. And third important thing is that the time scales that is involved in the hydrological processes. And the fourth one is the linkages that is there between the climate and water. The last one is the grey infrastructure. So when you talk about the hydrological cycle, we know that it is the water cycle is the most prominent part of the climate system. In fact, it is helping the interaction to take place between every component of the climate system. For instance, it's kind of a medium wherein the land the component is interacting with the atmospheric component. And when I say interaction, that is in terms of the feedback mechanisms and also in terms of the movement of energy and mass. That is basically this hydrological cycle is a very, very important role it is playing as far as the dynamics of climate system is concerned. And it is very, very essential. So whatever the temperature we are having, the average temperatures are almost 15 degrees centigrade. It is because of the interaction between the different components of climate system, wherein hydrological cycle is playing a very important role. So this is the most important point to be noted. The second important thing is that the relationship that is existing between the climate and the water. So when I just talked about because this climate change and variability can have a drastic effect on the rainfall pattern also, and it can lead to certain risk, flood risk and drought risk also. So that is a very complex relationship. We cannot understand it because for a simple reason is that so many dynamics, so many processes are involved, and that is a key point to be noted. That so any the modelers, climate change modelers, or even the managers, I mean resource managers, particularly the water resource managers, what they need to take into account is that they should contemplate the differential impacts of climate change on water resources. So only then they can they will gauge the gravity of the situation, and at the same time they can evolve certain smart policies. When I say smart policies, because whatever policy we are talking about as far as the water policy is concerned, it should be smart, it should be resilient in nature. So that is the aspect that has to be taken into account. Next is, as I talked about the hydrological processes, the process is having different time scales. So when it is having different time scales, their effect and their impact is going to have different dimensions also. As I just talked about the deficit in groundwater, what kind of impact it can have on the agriculture practices. So for instance, if you look at it, when there is a depletion of groundwater, that can have a drastic effect on the crop production also. And also, if you look at it very carefully, the climate change is observed to have a negative impact on the agriculture production. The main reason is that if you see the availability of water, irrigation, water, so that is decreasing. And because of that aspect, the climate change is going to have a negative impact on crop production. On the other hand, if you look at it, the flood, as I said, if there is an increased precipitation, definitely that can lead to a flood hazard. And that can have an effect on the livelihood of the people, and also it will be influencing the water availability and the quality of the water, even the sanitation it will be affected, and through what it can affect the infrastructure. So the kind of time scales, if you look at it, it is a very differential in nature. Next one is the linkages. When I talk about the linkages between the climate change and water, the most important thing is that it is by itself it's having a lot of complex relationship, but this can be increased because of the anthropogenic drivers like land use change or land cover changes, even the water regulation or withdrawal systems. I'm talking about the dam construction or even withdrawing the water for the various purposes like agriculture use or industrial use. For that matter, many uses the water resources are providing. And even the water pollution. So there is a multitude of factors that is involved that can even direct the linkages between the climate change and water. And next one is that, as I talked about the construction of the dams and other infrastructure, because of this construction of these dams only, we are in a position to use the water for either for potable purpose or for the industrial purpose. We are using it. So in this infrastructure, the green infrastructure also can be influenced by climate change. So it can have a negative impact. So that has to be taken into account as far as the modeling or to develop a suitable or sustainable water policy. Next is this water is having interaction between other sectors also. For instance, agriculture is the most prominent one, and industry, energy sector is also the second important sector. The third important thing is that the ecosystems. There is a lot of ecosystems are there, water-based ecosystems that can be influenced by climate change. The fourth important thing is the human settlement, and the last one is the sanitation and hygiene. So these are all the sectors that has to be taken into account in a nutshell. So why? Because we need to understand the dimension. For instance, human settlements. When we talk about human settlements in the coming decades, by the year 2050, the human population in the urban areas or coastal locations will be much, much higher. When the population is much higher in the urban or coastal areas, what kind of impact it can have on the water resources? Definitely the water pollution problem can increase, and also there will be demand for water resources. So under that circumstances, the climate change also can have a negative impact. So what measures we need to take into account? We need to develop certain infrastructure which is very climate resilient in nature, the public infrastructure I mean, so that we should plan in advance by the year 2050 what kind of whether it's a health infrastructure or a water infrastructure, we need to plan in advance. That's the point we need to take into account as far as the integration of or interaction of the sectors is concerned. The second important thing is the sanitation and hygiene. So whatever we are talking about, it is the ultimate thing is that we are planning to achieve the sustainable development goals. Particularly the SDG 6 talks about the water, the sanitation, hygiene, because it's the most important thing. So when you talk about the water resources, the nexus between water resources and climate change, we need to focus more on the hygiene aspect also, sanitation also, because as the population is increasing, what we potentially by the year 2050, we expect 10 billion people. So definitely the population is huge, and the demand for water for personal consumption is also going to increase. So definitely what we need to take into account is that how best we can use the water resources, how to make it resilient in nature. And second important thing is that whatever the use, the demand is concerned, presently the agriculture sector is using maximum, followed by the industry and other sectors. So what we planning to what we need to contemplate is that we need to focus on the efficiency aspect and develop certain strategies. Even the agriculture sectors also, what kind of strategies? It should be more of sustainable management of the water, and at the same time, even the crops, whatever crops we will be growing, those crops should use minimum of water. And at the same time, we will be trying to focus on the harvesting, water harvesting, or for that matter, how best we can use the water wherever it is falling, whether it's the precipitation or for that matter, whatever the water we are having it, the resources, whether it's a lake or wetland or river resources, we'll try to conserve it as much as possible. So this is about the interaction between the different sectors. Now, followed by this thing, we need to talk about the impacts of the climate change on water resources. When you talk about the impacts there will be multiple dimensions. When I say multiple dimensions, because the interaction in terms of the space and the time, it's very complex. The second important thing is that, as I said earlier, a lot of feedback is there within the hydrological system. It's a lot of feedback system. The interaction is there between the physical and human what you call processes. So these also has to be taken into account for understanding the climate change impacts. The next important point is that this impact, climate change impacts, can be viewed in terms of the availability of water, in terms of water quality, and also, the quantity of water for basic human needs. Why we need to discuss about these aspects, availability and the quantity and quality, because this water availability is going to, or in other words, this climate change impact with respect to the water resource, it's going to challenge our existence, it's going to challenge our progress towards achieving the sustainable development, even it is going to challenge our human rights to access the water resources. So in that way, it is very, very significant. Now, this climate change impacts can be discussed, because I talked about the hydrological changes that is because of climate change. It can have multiple impacts. Either the changes can be through hydrometeorological processes also, and also it can be have an effect on the related sectors, whether it's an agriculture sector or energy production or economic development. These all can have a multitude of effects. So in that way, what happened, because of these dimensions, this climate risk to the society will be aggravated. And now is the second important, once we have talked about the water availability, we need to talk about the water stress also. When I talk about water stress, because definitely, as I said, that in certain parts of the world, the precipitation is going to decline or decrease, and that can have a drastic effect on the water availability and stress also. And that particularly is mostly in the Western African region or Southwestern Australia, and where it will be more impact will be much, much higher as far as the water stress is concerned. And the next one is that quality aspect. When I talk about the water quality, it's a very significant thing, because this climate change, increase in surface temperature or related phenomena like precipitation, it is going to affect the water quality as well. Because on one hand, because of increase in the population, there are a lot of problems, whether it is the emergent pollutants or organic pollutants, the pathogens, that is already harming the water ecosystem. And in addition, because of the climate change, increase in surface temperature, that can also affect the water quality. For instance, if you see the algae blooms, algal growth, that can increase because of increase in water temperature. So it is a very sticky thing. When I say, because what happened, on one aspect, if you look at it, the water quality is deteriorating, and there's going to be a lot of demand for water. On the other aspect, because of the increase in surface temperature, there is an eutrophication condition, or the growth of the algal bloom. So what happened? It's very, very difficult condition. So what we need to take into account is that we need to try to focus more on the management of water. To reduce the negative impacts of climate change on water quality. And the second important thing is that we'll try to minimize the pollution load in water ecosystem. Next aspect, as far as the impact is concerned, I just talked about the urban areas, urban settlements. In the coming decades, what kind of impact it can have on the climate change impact on the urban settlements. And the related thing is that the demand for water. Water demand, as I said, that it is going to increase. As the population increases, definitely there is going to be demand is going to increase, either from the agriculture sector or industrial sector, or for recreation purpose of fishing activity. So there is multitude of uses water is providing. So definitely the water demand is going to increase. And this definitely, when there is an increase in the water demand, what steps we need to take into account? We need to take into account that how to look for the synergies. So between the sectors, is there any synergies there to minimize the use of water? On the other hand, to reduce the pollution level, or in other words, how to minimize the use of the particular water resource in that one particular sector. On the other hand, we'll try to increase the efficiency aspect also. That is with regard to the water demand. And when you look at the disaster, because when you talk about the climate variability, one important point comes to everyone's mind is that the occurrence of extreme events. When I talk about extreme events, other than the floods and droughts, the storms, cyclones, typhoons, hurricanes, that is also going to increase. And this also can have a drastic effect on the water resources. That has to be taken into account. And last one is the ecosystem. There are many ecosystems that is connected with the water resources, whether it's a river ecosystem or the lake ecosystem or wetland ecosystem. Each and every water-based ecosystem is having an ecosystem services to play. For instance, wetland is having multiple purposes, whether it's a climate regulation or even the pollution cleansing activity or carbon sequestration activity. It's having multiple purposes. The same is the case with the river ecosystem as well. So what we need to do as far as the river ecosystem is concerned, we'll try to minimize the pollution load, and at the same time we'll be trying to keep the base flow, environmental flow has to be kept into account. So to sum it up, so what in today's discussion, the important point we have discussed is the climate change trend, the impacts, and the most important thing is that what measures we need to take into account. As far as the measures are concerned, we need to look for the nature-based solutions, and water resource managers, particularly, they need to take into account the impacts of climate change on every aspect, whether it's an agriculture or industry, those impacts has to be taken into account before developing a water policy. And the last one is that the climate change mitigation and adaptation through water management, sustainable water management is the need of the hour, because only then we can achieve the sustainable development goals. Thank you very much.